At my own family dinner, my daughter-in-law looked at my dress, pointed, and laughed. She said loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's giving thrift store energy." The whole table laughed. Some even pulled out their phones to record me like I was a joke. My son sat there saying nothing. I stayed quiet that night. I smiled, even though my heart was breaking inside. But what no one knew was that in less than a week, her design firm would lose its biggest client. And that client would come to me. I bought her company in cash, and I made sure she understood one thing. Wealth doesn't always wear designer clothes. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Caroline Hayes. I am 55 years old, and I have lived most of my life believing that family means respect. I raised my son, Michael, mostly on my own after my husband passed away. I worked hard, saved every dollar, and slowly built wealth through real estate and investments. But unlike many people with money, I never cared for fancy clothes or luxury brands. I lived modestly. I dressed simply, and I believed that kindness mattered more than appearances. Michael grew up humble, but things changed when he married Aubrey. She was young, stylish, and came from a family that loved to show off their wealth. She owned an interior design firm, dressed in the latest brands, and loved to host gatherings that felt more like fashion shows than family dinners. I never fit in with her world. Whenever I visited, I felt her eyes on me, judging my clothes and my choices. Still, I showed up with love, bringing homemade dishes or desserts, because that was how I knew to give. I told myself it didn't matter if she looked down on me, as long as my son was happy. That night, she had invited both families for a large dinner at her home. Everyone was dressed in their best. I wore my favorite navy dress, one I had owned for years. It wasn't expensive, but it was comfortable, and it carried memories. I walked in holding a pie I had baked from scratch, proud to contribute. At first everything felt warm. The table was full of laughter, wine glasses clinking, and plates being passed around. I was happy to be near my son, watching him smile. But underneath that joy, I felt uneasy. Aubrey's sharp glances, her smirks, the way she whispered to her friends at the table. It was clear she was waiting for a moment, and when she finally opened her mouth, everything changed. The dinner was lively that evening. The table was long and covered in sparkling dishes and polished silverware. Aubrey had gone out of her way to make it look impressive, and I could tell she wanted everything to feel like a magazine spread. There were candles, floral arrangements, and soft music in the background. Everyone was talking and laughing. I kept reminding myself that I was there for my son, not for anyone's approval. I sat at the end of the table, quietly enjoying my meal and listening to the chatter around me. For a moment, I felt grateful just to be included, but that peace didn't last long. At one point, Aubrey leaned back in her chair, looked directly at me, and with a sharp smile said, "Caroline, I have to ask, where did you get that dress? It's giving thrift store energy." The room went silent for a beat, then laughter burst out. Her friends laughed the loudest, pulling out their phones to capture the moment as if it were entertainment. I could see screens pointing toward me, lights flashing, and fingers tapping as people recorded my embarrassment. Even some of the family members who should have known better chuckled behind their hands. I froze. My fork hovered above my plate. My cheeks burned, and my chest tightened as though the air had been sucked out of the room. I wanted to disappear. I looked toward my son, hoping he would say something, anything, to stop the cruelty. But Michael only let out an awkward laugh, his eyes darting around the table as if he was afraid to upset his wife. That silence, that failure to defend me, cut deeper than Aubrey's insult ever could. I forced myself to smile. "It's just an old dress I like," I said softly, trying to brush it off. My voice wavered, but I kept my head high. The laughter only grew louder. One of Aubrey's friends muttered, "She's so brave wearing that in public." More laughter. Inside, I was crumbling. Every sacrifice I had made for my son flashed through my mind. The nights I stayed awake worrying about bills. The mornings I packed his lunch before school. The long hours I worked so he could have new clothes, sports equipment, and a good education. And now, here I was, being mocked by the very woman who had married into our family, while my son sat silently at her side. I wanted to leave immediately, but I also didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me run away. I took small bites of food, barely tasting any of it, and waited until the plates were cleared. The whole time I sat quietly while others whispered, laughed, and scrolled through the videos they had recorded of me. When dessert came, I placed the pie I had baked on the table. Aubrey glanced at it and smirked. Oh, how quaint. Homemade. Her tone dripped with sarcasm, as if my effort was beneath her. Some of the younger guests laughed again. That was my breaking point. I realized that no matter how much love I brought, no matter how much effort I put in, Aubrey would always find a way to belittle me. And what hurt most was that my son had allowed it. I stood up politely, smiled, and said, "Thank you for the dinner, but I think I'll head home early." My voice was calm, though my hands trembled. I gathered my things, walked out with dignity, and closed the door behind me. The moment I sat in my car, the tears came. I cried not because of the insult, but because of the betrayal. I had spent my entire life teaching my son respect, humility, and kindness. Yet he had sat there watching me be mocked without lifting a finger. On the drive home, my sadness slowly turned into something else. I remembered all the times people underestimated me because of the way I looked, or because I chose not to flaunt my wealth. They never knew the hours I had spent building my businesses, the risks I had taken, the property I had acquired piece by piece, until I had created something strong and lasting. By the time I reached my house, my tears had dried. The pain of that dinner still burned, but beneath it, a fire had started. Aubrey thought she had humiliated me. She thought my simple clothes meant I was weak or beneath her. She had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would not seek revenge with anger or insults. I would not lower myself to her games, but I would remind her in the most undeniable way that true strength and wealth are not always the ones on display, and when the opportunity came, I would be ready. The morning after that dinner, I woke up still carrying the sting of humiliation. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the pie dish I had brought home, only half-eaten. My mind replayed every detail from the night before. Aubrey's mocking voice, the laughter, the glow of phone screens as my family treated me like entertainment. Every time I thought of Michael sitting silently while his wife tore me down, a fresh wave of hurt rolled through me. But mixed with that pain was something stronger. Determination. I had lived too long, worked too hard, and overcome too much to let anyone reduce me to a punchline. I wasn't just a mother. I was a woman who had built her own success, brick by brick, deal by deal, and it was time to remind myself of that. Later that day, I got a call from an old business associate. We had worked together years ago when I was expanding into real estate and investing in commercial properties. He mentioned something casually in our conversation that immediately caught my attention. Aubrey's design firm was rumored to be in trouble. Their biggest corporate client, a nationwide hotel chain, was reviewing their contract. The company wasn't happy with delays and cost overruns on several projects. My associate said they were looking quietly for other firms to handle their design work. I sat back in my chair, my pulse quickening. This was it. The opportunity I hadn't even known I was waiting for. Aubrey had tried to humiliate me by mocking what I wore, by treating me like I didn't belong in her shiny little world. But she had no idea how close her own empire was to cracking. Instead of celebrating her downfall, I began planning. My father used to tell me that revenge born of anger burns out quickly, but justice built with patience lasts forever. I wasn't going to lash out. I was going to act with the same quiet strength that had carried me all my life. The next morning, I reached out to the hotel chain's executive office. I already had connections in the hospitality industry from years of investing in properties, so I was able to arrange a meeting within days. I went in prepared, carrying a detailed proposal put together by a small but talented design team I had quietly hired over the years for my own projects. When I walked into that boardroom, I wasn't Caroline the thrift store punchline. I was Caroline Hayes, A woman with the financial resources and the business sense to offer solutions Aubrey's firm never could. I presented my vision for how the hotels could refresh their properties on time and under budget, without sacrificing style. I backed it up with my financial statements, showing them I could fund the transition immediately without delays. The executives listened, asked questions, and nodded. By the end of the meeting, I could see the shift in their eyes. They weren't just considering me as an option. They were impressed. A few days later, I got the call. They were terminating their contract with Aubrey's firm and moving their business to me. It was official. Aubrey's company had lost its biggest client, the one that made up most of their revenue, and I had secured it for myself, but I didn't stop there. I knew what would happen next. Without that client, her company would be desperate, drowning in overhead costs, and unable to keep up. And when the moment came, I would be ready. I instructed my lawyer to monitor the firm quietly, keeping tabs on their financial health. Within a week, the reports came in. Aubrey's company was in crisis mode. Layoffs were starting. Investors were panicking. They were considering putting the business up for sale. That was when I made my decision. I wasn't going to just compete with her. I was going to take everything she had built and turn it into mine. I arranged the paperwork, lined up my accounts, and prepared the funds. I was ready to make a cash buyout. Quick, clean, undeniable. And the best part? I didn't need to announce it. I didn't need to brag. I didn't need to post videos online like the ones they had recorded of me. I would let my actions speak for themselves. As I looked over the final contracts with my lawyer, I felt something I hadn't felt since that humiliating dinner. Power. Not the loud, flashy kind Aubrey flaunted with her designer labels, but the quiet, unshakable power of knowing who I was and what I was capable of. The woman who had been mocked at dinner for wearing a simple navy dress was about to own the company of the woman who had tried to shame her. And when I walked into Aubrey's office with those papers in my hand, she would finally understand that real strength doesn't need to be worn on your sleeve. It's built deep inside, and it never fades. The stage was set. All that was left was the reveal. The day finally came. Papers were signed, funds were transferred, and the deal was complete. In one clean transaction, Aubrey's firm, her pride, her empire, her entire identity belonged to me. I didn't celebrate with champagne or announcements. I simply slipped the documents into a leather folder, put on that same navy dress she had mocked, and drove to her office. When I arrived, the lobby was buzzing with tension. Employees whispered in small groups, their faces pale, their eyes filled with worry. The news of the lost client had already rattled them, and the rumor of a buyout was spreading fast. I walked through the glass doors with calm confidence, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Heads turned. A few employees recognized me from family gatherings, and their whispers grew louder. I knocked once on the door of the main office and pushed it open. Aubrey sat behind her sleek glass desk, her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes wide with panic as she barked instructions. When she saw me, she froze. She ended the call abruptly, her perfect smile slipping into confusion. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her tone sharp, almost desperate. I stepped forward and placed the folder on her desk. "I'm here for business." She frowned and opened the folder, her eyes darting across the documents. As she read, the color drained from her face. She flipped through page after page, her hands shaking, until she reached the last page with my signature. This isn't possible," she whispered. You bought my company?" I looked at her evenly. "Yes, as of this morning, everything here belongs to me. The contracts are signed, the funds have cleared. The business you laughed about me never understanding is now mine." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The room was silent, except for the sound of her shallow breathing. I leaned in slightly, my voice calm but firm. "Do you remember at dinner when you mocked my dress? When you said it was giving thrift store energy? When you let everyone laugh and record me like I was nothing? That navy dress you mocked is the same one I'm wearing today. And it just walked in here as your boss." The shock on her face was almost too much for her to hide. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as the quiet mother she thought she could belittle, but as the woman who now held the keys to her future. Her voice cracked. "Why would you do this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply told her the truth. "I didn't do this out of spite, Aubrey. I did this because you needed a reminder. Wealth isn't measured by the price tag on your clothes. True strength doesn't come from putting others down. It comes from patience, from resilience, and from dignity. You thought my simplicity made me weak, but it made me stronger than you ever realized." She sat back in her chair, stunned, her hands gripping the arms tightly. For once, she had no clever remark, no cutting insult. The silence between us was louder than any words. I gathered the folder and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You have a choice now," I said without looking back. "You can stay on and work under me, or you can walk away. But whichever you choose, remember this moment. Remember who you tried to humiliate, and remember that the quietest people often carry the heaviest power." When I stepped back into the lobby, every pair of eyes was on me. Word had spread. Employees looked at me not with mockery, but with respect. I smiled at them, small but steady, and walked out with my head held high. Outside, the cool air filled my lungs, and for the first time in days, I felt truly free. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't sought revenge with cruel words. I had let my actions speak for me. The woman they laughed at for her simple clothes was the same woman who now owned the very company built on appearances. As I got into my car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. The navy dress still fit the same way it always had, but now it carried a new meaning. It wasn't just a dress. It was a symbol, a reminder that no matter how others judged me, I knew my worth. That night, as I sat at home, I thought back to the humiliation I had felt at dinner, the laughter, the phones, the betrayal from my own son, and I realized something powerful. Sometimes you don't need to answer disrespect with anger. Sometimes the most powerful response is to quietly rise above and let life deliver the lesson for you. And that's exactly what I had done. When I left Aubrey's office that day, the documents signed and the company in my name, I thought the chapter was closed. But in reality, it was only the beginning of what came next. The buyout didn't just change ownership on paper, it shifted the balance of respect in my family and forced everyone, including my son, to see me in a way they hadn't before. That evening, Michael came to my house. I could see the weight of guilt written all over his face before he even stepped inside. He sat at my kitchen table, the same place I had cried alone after the dinner, and for a long moment, he couldn't find the right words. Finally, he said softly, "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have defended you that night. I should never have let her talk to you like that. I studied him, my son who I had raised with every ounce of strength and sacrifice I had. Part of me wanted to hold on to the hurt, to remind him of the pain his silence caused. But another part of me, the part that still saw the little boy who once clung to my hand and begged me not to leave him at school, knew I needed to be honest, without bitterness. "You hurt me, Michael," I told him. "Not because Aubrey made a joke. People will always try to put others down. But because you didn't stand up for me. Respect starts at home. If you don't protect your own family, then who will?" He lowered his head, ashamed, and nodded. "You're right. I was wrong. I let her control the room. I thought laughing it off was easier, but it wasn't. It made me weak." Hearing him admit that didn't erase the pain, but it opened the door to something important. Growth. I could forgive him, not because I had forgotten what happened, but because I wanted him to learn. I wanted him to see that real love means standing up, even when it's uncomfortable. As for Aubrey, the fallout from that day in her office spread quickly. The staff respected me for the way I carried myself, and many of them came to me directly, saying they were relieved to work under someone who valued stability over appearances. Aubrey had no choice but to stay on for a while, training under my leadership. She went from mocking my dress to sitting quietly across from me in meetings, her arrogance stripped away. She never apologized directly, but her silence was enough proof that she had learned her lesson. I didn't need her apology. I already had my dignity back. Owning the firm wasn't about revenge or money. It was about reminding myself and everyone else of something I had always known deep down. True strength doesn't come from what you wear, how loud you speak, or how much attention you command. It comes from patience, resilience, and the quiet determination to rise above disrespect without losing yourself in anger. The navy dress that Aubrey once ridiculed became more than a piece of clothing to me. It became a symbol of everything I stood for: humility, strength, legacy. I kept it hanging in my closet, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder that I didn't need anyone's approval to know my worth. In the weeks that followed, family dinners felt different. Aubrey was quieter, Michael was more attentive, and the rest of the family looked at me with a new respect. No one pulled out their phones to record me. No one laughed at my clothes. The balance had shifted, and it wasn't because I had demanded it with words. It was because I had shown it through action. Sitting at those dinners afterward, I realized I had gained something more valuable than any company or contract. I had reclaimed my voice in my own family, and that was worth more than all the designer labels Aubrey could ever wear. As I reflect on everything that happened, I see it clearly now. Life will always put you in situations where people underestimate you, mock you, or try to strip away your dignity. The question is not whether it will happen, but how you will respond. Will you let their cruelty define you, or will you stand taller, let your actions speak, and remind them who you are? That night when Aubrey mocked me, I stayed quiet because I thought silence would protect me. But silence without action is just surrender. Silence with patience, paired with the right response, is power. In the end, I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to argue, and I didn't need to humiliate her the way she humiliated me. I simply showed her that the woman she tried to laugh out of the room was the very woman she would one day answer to. And that is a lesson I carry with me every day. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because the quiet ones are often the ones writing the ending. If you were in my place, would you have walked away quietly, or found a way to rise above like I did? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that will keep you thinking.